In this lesson, I'm going to talk about the fundamental concepts in Java. Now, these are important before we actually get into the programming end of things. It's important to understand these concepts before we can apply them. Obviously, with every programming language, there are certain rules that must be followed. So let's take a look at what some of these core concepts are in Java. So Java is basically an object-oriented language. Now what that means is that it consists of objects and classes. So for instance, objects have states and behaviors. As an example, think of an object as, for instance, a dog having various states such as color, name, breed, as well as various behaviors like wagging, barking, eating, sleeping, and so on. An object is an instance of a class. In other words, all these objects are put together in a particular class. So think of a class as a standard classroom with a bunch of students. So you may have a classroom that contains 20 students. You may have a class that contains 200 students. So a class can be defined as a template or a blueprint that simply describes the behavior or the states that an object of its type support. Next is the types of variables. So this particular class can contain any of the following variable types. And variables are simply that store data. So you can have a local variable, you can have an instance variable, or you can have a class variable. And I will explain each of these next. So here's a local variable. So variables that are defined inside methods, constructors, or blocks are called local variables. The variable will be declared and initialized within the method, and the variable will be destroyed when the method has completed. And we'll take a look at what methods are shortly. But for now, just understand that variables are simply information that is defined inside a certain method, constructor, or blocks of code. The instance variables are variables within a class, but outside any method. And these variables are initialized when the class is instantiated. Instance variables can be accessed from inside any method, constructor, or blocks of that particular class. So importantly here is just to understand that instance variable, they stay outside of method. And then we have a class variable. These are variables declared within a class, outside any method, with a static keyword. So these are the three types of variables that can be used in Java. Next is the method. Now we talked about methods earlier. I mentioned that concept of methods, but really let's take a look at what a method is. So a class can have any number of methods to access the value of various kinds of methods. So for instance, in the code that you see, barking with a set of parentheses, hungry with a set of parentheses, and sleeping with a set of parentheses are all methods. In other words, they tell Java what to do. And there are hundreds and hundreds of methods that we can use in Java. Next, the concept of constructors. So every class has a constructor. If we do not explicitly write a constructor for a class, the Java compiler builds a default constructor. Each time a new object is created, for example, at least one constructor will be invoked. The main rule here is to remember that constructors should have the same name as the class. A class can have more than one constructor if you choose to do so. But importantly, the main rule is that you have to have the same name. Here's an example of a constructor. So we have a public class called puppy. Then we use the public puppy string name. And notice in this instance, this constructor has one parameter called name. The two backslashes that you see are simply comments that you can write within your code so that you know exactly what this piece of code will do. Now, how do we go about creating an object in a Java program? There are three steps that you have to remember when creating an object from a class. First is the declaration. So a variable declaration within a variable name with an object type. Next is the instantiation. The new keyword is used to create the object, and then the initialization. In other words, that particular new keyword is followed by a call to a constructor, and this call initializes the new object. So just basic rule of creating an object from a class. Here's an example. Once again, we have the public class called puppy. We give it a string name, and this constructor has again one parameter called name. Then we print out the past name is whatever the name is. And at the bottom, notice where it says my puppy equals new puppy Tommy. This is in fact the name that we're passing. And this statement would create an object called my puppy. And you're essentially defining that my puppy equals new puppy, which by name is Tommy. So again, object oriented, right? Keep that in mind when you're working with Java. Here's some additional important source file declaration rules. And as we begin to work with Java more and more, we'll use the editor, for instance. I'll demonstrate what these file declaration rules are and what do we mean by these. But essentially, these rules are important when declaring classes, import statements, and package statements in a source file. There can be only one public class per source file. A source file can have multiple non-public classes, however, and the public class name should be name of the source file as well, which should be appended by .java at the end. So for example, the class name is public class employee, then the source file should also be called employee.java. So you need to remember the source file declaration rules. Here's the next set of rules. If the class is defined inside a package, for example, then the package statement should be the first statement in the source file. If import statements are present, then they must be written between the package statement and the class declaration. If there are no package statements, then the import statement should be the first line in the source file. And the declaration rule for important package statements will apply to all the classes present in the source file. It is not possible to declare different import or package statements to different classes within the same source file. And again, at this point, just kind of go through this concept of declaration rules. As we move into the hands-on exercises, this concept will become clearer. And again, you practice more and more, and this should be second nature to you. But we talked about packages. Let me explain what Java packages are. So in simple, it is a way of categorizing the classes and interfaces. When developing applications in Java, hundreds of classes and interfaces will be written. Therefore, categorizing these classes is a must, as well as makes life much easier. So think of a package as a big box that contains different pieces of code, right? Or packages that are part of this same box. Let's apply these concepts by creating our first Java program, and I'll demonstrate the declaration rules, how to name Java, what the editor looks like, what a method is, what a class is, and objects as well. So with this, let's move to our next lesson.